Well, greetings, Dordt community. My name is Justin Ariel Bailey, and I serve as a professor of theology here at Dordt. And it's my privilege to introduce to you our first Monday speaker. Mr. Justin Giboney is the co-founder and president of the AND campaign, which aims at cultivating a gospel-centered approach to the political arena. Mr. Giboney is an attorney, and he is a political strategist in Atlanta, Georgia. He has successfully managed campaigns for elected officials in the state and referendums relating to the city's transportation and water infrastructure. And he is the co-author of a new book, Compassion and Conviction. And he played safety for Vanderbilt University. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Justin Giboney.
To address you today, even though it's happening virtually. I would have loved to be able to come to you, but we know that the crisis is what it is, and I still think we can get the message through. I'd like to thank President Hoekstra and Emily Rowe for the invitation, and really for the courage to invite someone in to have a conversation about politics, which can sometimes seem like a very divisive conversation, but I truly believe that it doesn't have to be that way, especially for Christians. And let me start off by saying that I am fully persuaded that God has called me, among others, to a ministry that focuses on the intersection between faith and politics. And politics, again, is a very rough subject to broach in the church, but we have to do it. Christians need a complete paradigm shift, in my opinion, when it comes to how we engage politics. We can no longer see politics merely through a partisan lens. We must challenge both sides, and that's really what the AND campaign tries to do. We try to challenge both parties and challenge both ideologies. So let me say this before we get started. If you are a staunch progressive Democrat or a staunch conservative Republican, you will likely hear something in this talk that conflicts with your preferred narrative. You'll hear something that you may not like. But let me remind you that that's what happens when the gospel confronts human constructs. But rest assured, I won't be telling you who to vote for. I won't be telling you that one side is purely angelic and the other side is demonic. I have no interest in doing any of that. But I will be putting both sides through biblical scrutiny to expose where they fall short of the gospel. You see, the Christian public witness is so much more dynamic and brilliant than political conservatism or secular progressivism. It's not even close. The truth and moral order professed by conservative Republicans is a lesser truth and a lesser moral order than that which we see in the Bible. The love and social justice advocated for by many progressive Democrats is a lesser love and a lesser justice than what we see in the gospel. When Christians outsource our political witness to a political party or to an ideological tribe, we do ourselves and we do society a huge disservice. And I hope to explain or expound a little bit on why that is through this conversation. If you would, please turn your Bibles, if you have them, to Ephesians 4, verses 14 through 15. That is Ephesians 4, verses 14 through 15. And it reads, "Then we will no longer be infants, tossed back and forth by the waves, blown here and there by every wind of teaching, and by the cunning and craftiness of people in their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow to become in every respect the mature body of Him who is the head, that is Christ." Speaking the truth in love. Today's subject is about engaging the socio-political space with biblical fidelity. And I won't hide the ball. The lesson today, based on biblical doctrine, is that we can't engage faithfully without love and truth. To put it another way, that we can't engage faithfully as Christians without justice and moral order. We can't choose our party over gospel imperatives, or choose our political ideology over biblical doctrine. As we search for answers to the problems that afflict our society today, I'm afraid that Christians are being tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by false cultural doctrine and also blown by the winds of flawed pop culture prescriptions. We get exposed to a trending topic or a fancy theory in academia, and we begin to put our faith in political parties and ideologies that talk good or that flatter us, but that aren't actually edifying, that can show no proof of concept, and more importantly, simply aren't biblical, but yet and still, based on the cultural identity of the messenger or the political party of origin, we follow that which is completely unsubstantiated. On the other hand, the gospel of Jesus Christ produces results. First and foremost, it's the key to salvation. But even for those who haven't opened up their Bibles to receive that special revelation, if they do some outside historical research, they will find that it can also lay claim to tangible social renewal that can be observed by all. So when it comes to political engagement, if the postmodernist and the rugged individualists will have their say, and the hyper-woke identitarians will throw in their 2 cents, the people of God best not repeat them, but when we do speak on it, the Bible says that we should speak the truth in love. Let me ask you a question. Are Christians speaking the truth in love in the public square today? Is that what we're known for? Let's take a recent example. On May 25th at approximately 8:12 p.m., Central Standard Time in the south central portion of Minneapolis, Minnesota, 46-year-old George Floyd was arrested for allegedly using a counterfeit $20 bill to purchase cigarettes. His face was subsequently pressed against the blacktop with a knee wedged in his neck. He told the officers that he couldn't breathe. It said that he cried out for his mother, and he died. He was killed over a fake $20 bill. 5 image bearers lost a father, and the veneer of impartiality was removed from parts of the American justice system. While there were many peaceful protests, and thank God for those peaceful protests, in response to the killing, some groups in places like Portland, Oregon, engaged in all manner of performative stunts, unapproved by the black community that was actually in harm's way. They rioted and looted and set the city ablaze. They even assaulted some African-American police officers who were taking every measure to deal with them sensibly. A group in another city smashed the doors of the Ronald McDonald House with families of sick children still inside, and what they claimed was on behalf of social justice. But see, what I'm saying is that Christians should be able to look at the killing of George Floyd and realize that law and order by themselves are insufficient. That order must be coupled with justice. Christians should also be able to look at the chaos in places like Portland, Oregon, and realize that that concept of social justice is insufficient. Social justice must be coupled with moral order, not passivity or respectability, but moral order. What do Christians have to say about this matter? And is anyone hearing us? I don't have to tell you that we are living in a tumultuous socio-political moment where every issue must be politicized and polarized, common ground is scarce, and far too many Christians are mere partisans. With nothing unique or particularly thoughtful to add to the discourse, we are just red or blue soldiers that add more vitriol to the debate. A large number of us, if we're going to be honest, have outsourced our public witness to a political party or an ideological tribe. And as a consequence, we've become willfully gullible. We believe anything that fits our narrative. We're happy to accept the false and arbitrary narratives constructed by well-paid sophists in talking point factories. They give us the rhetoric and the alibis to dismiss some of the people and some of the things that God loves without even pricking our conscience. I don't have to do racial justice, some would say, because that's always Marxism. Or I don't have to stand up for the unborn because pro-lifers are just trying to control women. They don't really care anyway. And we treat these narratives like factual reality. But reality is nuanced, and our narratives rarely are. You see, a nuanced narrative would force us to admit that our political opponents might actually have a point sometimes, that we're not without fault. Instead of telling the truth in love, we tell the truth insofar as it impugns our opponents and serves our interests and cultural preferences. Lord, have mercy on our souls for being so fickle as to praise a righteous and just God in church, and then to step into the civic arena and put our faith in lesser gods and lesser institutions. We've been given the truth. We've been given a framework for engaging our neighbors and society at large. And even in the most difficult situations, it compels us, the love of Jesus compels us to speak the truth in love. Let's go into the scripture. The conversation about engaging politics to better society inevitably must address what teachings we follow and what methods we'll employ to achieve our objectives. Today, many Christians have been seduced by ideologies that are made with human hands and can't withstand biblical scrutiny. The Bible speaks to this. In Ephesians 4, Apostle Paul is talking to the church of Ephesus. The church of Ephesus was the persevering church. Ephesus had endured a lot of suffering and also had false prophets who were trying to infiltrate the church with false teachings. Earlier in Ephesians 4, Paul talks about being mature. He's talking about growth in mind, growth in understanding, growth in knowledge of the truth, and growth in moral character. That's what he means by maturing. So when he says, once we mature, then we will no longer be infants. He's saying, once we grow in mind, once we grow in knowledge of the truth, once we grow in moral understanding, then we will no longer be infants. Meaning we won't be so malleable or impressionable, tossed back and forth by the waves, blown here and there by every wind of teaching. Paul is telling the church of Ephesus that a mature Christian is not easily deceived. That these false teachers wouldn't be able to indoctrinate mature Christians because mature Christians know what they stand for. Regardless of what false teachings are prominent, regardless of what pop culture may be saying, regardless of how much we are suffering, a mature Christian should always be able to speak the truth in love. Christians should never allow their circumstances or the tactics of their opponents to dictate who we are. Everyone wants to claim the civil rights movement, but a lot of people don't understand one of the primary guiding principles of that movement. Yes, the civil rights movement was about changing policies and changing systems and things of that nature, but there was something that was more foundational, that was underlying that was even more important. And it was the idea that no matter what you were going through, no matter how evil you felt your opponent was, that you could never allow your opponent to have a negative impact on your spirit. You could win the political battle, you could win the policy battle, you could change the system, but if you allowed someone to have a negative impact on your spirit, you lost everything. Everyone wants to quote Dr. Martin Luther King, but not everyone wants to talk about how his life taught us that it's better to die than to hate your enemy. We must always be able to speak the truth in love. This doesn't just apply to our personal relationships, but also to our cultural and political interactions. Political and social ideologies are not all bad. That's not my point. You can decide whether progressivism or conservatism is best in a given situation. But one thing I can tell you is that they're not the gospel, which means they're fallible. We have to stop defending our political parties and defending our ideological tribes as if they are inerrant and infallible, because they're not. The truth is that the most prominent ideologies often separate love and truth as if they are in conflict, as if love and truth are at odds or mutually exclusive. You see, one side is supposedly all about love. The other side claims to be about truth, and Christians are told to choose between the two. Well, I come to tell you today, brothers and sisters, that that is a false choice. A Christian can choose a political party, that's fine. A Christian cannot choose between love and truth because they're not in conflict. They're actually interdependent. Tim Keller put it this way. He said that love without truth is sentimentality, meaning it's overly emotional or lacking in substance. And that truth without love is harshness. It's mean, it's uncompassionate. These ideologies tend to be either lacking in love or lacking in truth. And as a result, when it comes to political ideology, to be conservative or progressive at all times and on every single issue is not only intellectually lazy and easily manipulated, it's not faithful. You see, ideological conservatism and theological conservatism are not always the same thing. The far left's conception of social justice is not always consistent with a biblical understanding. If we're conservative, when the issue calls for change or the dismantling of old prejudiced structures, then we're helping to maintain injustice. If we're progressive, when the moment calls for the regeneration or preservation of moral order, then we're complicit in society's rejection of the truth. A Christian cannot simply follow behind an ideological tribe. We must be supplying both of them with heavy doses of love and truth if we're going to be who we're called to be. So what I'm trying to do right now is give you a gospel-centered framework for how to view politics and how to engage politics. On one side of that framework is love and social concern and justice. On the other side of that framework is compassion and truth and conviction. So let's talk about the love side first. It should pain us that other communities can legitimately question whether or not they are loved by Christians, or legitimately question whether the Christian community will treat them fairly. Love doesn't guarantee agreement or affirmation, but it does call us to be concerned about the well-being of others. You can understand systematic theology and memorize the entire Bible, but if you're not loving and compassionate, then you're not being Christ-like. This is where conservatives often run into trouble. We've been commanded to love our neighbors as ourselves. And we can't do that if we're not willing to advocate for our neighbor's well-being and to protect human dignity. That's all a biblical definition of social justice is. According to the Great Commandment, the second half of the Great Commandment, if you would want justice for yourself, if you would seek justice for yourself, then you must want it and you must seek it for others. If we truly love our neighbors, we'll be socially concerned. And that social concern won't just be a sentiment. It'll be active. And it'll involve self-sacrifice. You guys have heard the debate. We supposedly have Christians who are against social justice. But I don't believe them. I think everyone is for social justice. Some of us just limit it to the people that we care about and deny it to others because it would inconvenience us. Let me give you an illustration. No one is going to sit around and watch someone in their family be unjustly imprisoned. No one listening to me today would allow that to happen if there was something they could do about it. No one would allow their children or the children in their neighborhood to drink lead-poisoned water if there was something that they could do to prevent it. And why is that? Because they believe in social justice. They believe that there's a certain standard by which everyone should be treated based on human dignity. But what we have to realize is that justice is harder than charity. There's a reason that people will give you charity long before they give you justice. Now, don't get me wrong. Charity is good. Please keep doing charity, but understand that charity can be distant and that the giver of charity is in control of how much they give and how much their giving will impact them. Justice, on the other hand, is either given fully or not given at all. It's a God standard. It threatens to disrupt the very systems and societal arrangements that benefit us. At some point, justice demands a conflict with self-interest. It dismantles the very podiums and platforms upon which we stand and place our pride and look down on others. There can be no social renewal without love, justice, and social concern. Without them, you'll only create a harsh and hypocritical society that excludes and marginalizes certain groups. So that's the love, justice, and social concern side of this framework. But let's talk about truth. Let's talk about moral order and conviction and how that plays a part, or should play a part, in Christian politics. In Ephesians 4:15, the term speak the truth comes from the Greek word that refers to teaching or professing the truth as it relates to doctrine. Let me be very clear, that is not subjective. Everyone does not have their own separate, independent truth. To speak the truth is to profess right doctrine or to be honest in how you recount events. Listen, we worship a God of moral order. God's truth provides us with direction and structure. In an ever-changing world, his truth is unchanging. Now, I know that in urban settings and a lot of times around young people and in popular culture, everyone is trying to prove how progressive they are. And let me show you exactly where progressives run into trouble too. Because to move forward and to fix things can be good. And that's usually what people mean when they say that they are progressive. But being progressive is not the answer in every situation. Let me give you an illustration. If you're on the edge of a cliff, to progress or to even lean forward probably isn't such a good idea. It's also a bad idea if you're already headed in the wrong direction. Sometimes God is asking us to stand firm on his word. Sometimes God is asking us to preserve things and institutions that he's already established as good. Modern thought tells us that we can improve everything, but God's truth can't be improved. You can think of it sort of like a Picasso. You can't improve a Picasso. You can only deface a Picasso. If you go up to any masterpiece with a paintbrush and some sort of erasing agent, I don't care how great of an artist you are. If you add anything to it or you take anything away from it, you've made it worse. God doesn't need our counsel. He doesn't need us to improve or evolve his truth. Sometimes what seems good and pleasant to us in the moment is actually destructive. Sometimes God is calling us to obedience and self-denial. Progressives. This is because it's very hard to be obedient and to deny self when you buy into a societal ethic that says that individual expression is sovereign. Can Christians fully embrace this philosophy and be faithful? It might be flattering, but you won't see an endorsement of that type of philosophy here. Even if you only want to read the New Testament, if you're one of those folks that only want to read the red letters, you won't find Jesus endorsing a human-centered, self-dictated, truth, or reality. This book tells us to die to self and to be crucified with Christ. This book consistently is about self-sacrifice, not self-indulgence. So you may be saying, Justin, are you telling me that I can't be progressive politically? I'm not necessarily saying that, no. But what I am saying is that when in conflict, your Christianity must override your progressivism. Your Christianity must override your conservatism because both of them are flawed. We can't exchange the truth for confusion. We can't exchange moral order for chaos. But you see, Jesus provided us, thankfully, with a model for social renewal that was concerned about marginalized groups or marginalized individuals in society. And we should pursue the same course. But he didn't simply patronize people with sentimentality. He attended to them with love and truth. We can see it in John 8. This was the case of the adulterous woman who was about to be stoned. What does Jesus say to her? He says, go. This is his love liberating her from these hypocrites who are intent on hurting her. Him telling her to go is releasing her from this societal bondage. But we have to realize that he didn't stop there. He also said, sin no more. Because the other half of the truth, ladies and gentlemen, was that she would never completely be free. She would never completely be unbound until her heart changed and she turned from her sin. Similarly, in John 5, the lame man was told to stand up and walk. And then later he was told to stop sinning. You see, the woman wasn't only a victim of external bondage, but also of her own internal bondage. The man's infirmity wasn't only an outward disability. There was another matter that had to be dealt with by inward transformation. There's a similar theme in Exodus. God delivered the Hebrews from Pharaoh's hands, but he doesn't say go off and live happily ever after doing whatever you want to do. No, what happens after he liberates them? He gives them the law. He demands their obedience. He chastises them. Yes, our God is a liberator, but he's also a father that requires moral order from the liberated. He brings wrath upon the oppressor and calls his children to self-denial so that they don't become the oppressor. But too many Christians have embraced ideologies that are keen on identifying how others have sinned against us while blinding us to how we're being devoured by our own sin. If the adulterous woman were here today, one side of the church would be saying, stone her for she has broken the law. And the other side would be saying, slay queen, live your truth. And both would be leaving her in chains. Both would be leaving her imprisoned. That was not the pedagogic creed of Jesus Christ of Nazareth. He taught that the unjust and the disobedient would receive God's wrath, and that Christian love was unconditional, but that it wasn't without discernment or critique. There is a way that seems right to man that ends in death. It's time to tighten up our philosophies, our methodologies, and our ideologies and adhere to a gospel standard in the political space. Let me ask you this in conclusion. What will be the condition of your heart on November 4th and perhaps the weeks and months of fallout thereafter? Will you be drunk off the thrill of victory, reveling in the triumphalism of a tribal win? Alternatively, will you be wallowing in the bitter agony of defeat, brokenhearted without a word of hope or encouragement for your suffering neighbor? Or will you be faithful and remain sober and resolved in the encouragement or discouragement of the outcome? Judicious and unbowed. Our political engagement must be a profound civic work, a great work, It's not to be taken lightly or used for our own frivolous purposes. Let me give you a historical example of what I mean. Imagine, if you will, Frederick Douglass preparing for a debate on the subject of abolition as his people continued to suffer through the dark night of American slavery. Pen in hand, memories of braided bullwhips and rusted chains running through his mind, knowing full well that as he wrote, his brothers were still being beaten like mules and his sisters were still having their babies torn from their grasp, raped and disregarded without recourse. And yet, with all this going on, he still had to construct a cogent, constitutional, and moral case without allowing his emotions to pull him into logical fallacies. He had to articulate the pain of generations of disinherited black souls without flinching or without sinning under the weight of his anger. This couldn't have been just a casual or haphazard undertaking. It certainly wasn't a task to be neglected or trifled with. No, this was an opportunity to knock down the gates of hell. A chance to expose the devil's dealings, to emancipate God's children, and to change the world. As he shrewdly maneuvered through the halls of power, this couldn't have been just another day at the office, a leisurely stroll through the civic landscape. Not at all. It was a chance to slay giants, to bid the kingdom come, a chance to serve notice about God's will and to advocate that his will be done. How dare we waste our words trading insult for insult? How dare we allow our elected officials to waste our time tweeting instead of policy making? How dare we waste our witness paying homage to inept partisan idols when we have people looking to us to hear what God has to say about the matter? Our public witness is a declaration of faith, a testament to the excellence of being bound to the ultimate purveyor of grace and truth. A Christian witness confined to the limits of progressivism or conservatism is a witness squandered, a light hidden, a praise and worship chorus muted. We must find ways to be distinctive in our public witness because we know the truth and we know Jesus' love. God bless you. Thank you for having me.
Well, Justin, thanks so much for your talk, and thank you for your book, which I finished reading last night, and I found to be both accessible and inspiring. In fact, when I read it, I wondered if I have suffered from a failure of what you call moral imagination in believing that to engage the political realm with compassion and conviction is still possible. And so I want to thank you for that too, that you don't just argue for it in your book, but you embody it in your professional work. So thank you again. My question is related to that for you. As the election literally hangs over us, we feel polarized perhaps like never before. And regardless of who wins the election, half the country will be devastated. You say in your book, there's an exhausted majority. And many of us are discouraged. We feel paralyzed by our political options. And some of us want to unplug from the whole conversation. But you come across as so hopeful, and hopeful as a person who is working in the trenches, waist deep in the work. And so my first question is just, how do you resist cynicism and continue to be so hopeful in the work that you're doing?
Good question, and I appreciate this conversation. One of the things that I try to do when I think about politics is put things into perspective. Why are we engaging in politics? And the answer for me, as I've said, is to defend human dignity and to promote human flourishing. And there are so many opportunities to do that. We can't just focus on the one election and the tension that may be surrounding kind of national issues. There are a lot of local issues and people that are working hard to make lives better in that space, which is often more of a direct impact, which is oftentimes not a partisan conversation. And so there are opportunities to do that. And then I also have the opportunity, because I do travel and talk to so many Christians around the nation, to see Christians who are both Republicans and Democrats coming together to have conversations about criminal justice and racial justice and the sanctity of life in ways that we haven't seen before. The other thing that really gives me hope and encourages me is just the voices that I see God kind of lifting up. So you have guys like Dr. Charlie Dates, Dr. Esau McCauley, Lisa Fields, Alan Noble, that are really starting to speak out and gain a voice and a platform, who see these things differently, who can go to different types of demographics within the church and speak. And those folks always give me encouragement. So we do have, it's a tough time. We're not going to deny that or act like everything's all good. That's not my point. But we do have a lot of opportunities to make things better. And if we go about the public engagement and political engagement a different way, then we can see some change. And we should all believe that. We should all have the moral imagination, as you mentioned before, to see that can happen.
Yeah, so let me just push you a little bit further on that. One possible pushback to your project and to your book is, yeah, of course, we want to have compassion and conviction, but don't we have to choose sides at some point? Justice chooses sides. For example, many believers would argue that either a single policy position or the sub-Christian character of a candidate is disqualifying from supporting a candidate or supporting a party. Most of us feel like there's problems with both sides. But if you ask people on either side of the partisan divide, at least, they would say, well, yes, there's problems on our side, but the other side is so much worse than we are. So what sort of guidance can you give us in that quandary that a lot of us are finding ourselves in?
The first thing, and some people who say that, my first question to them is, what do you mean by choose sides? Does it mean that you have to take positions on issues? That's correct. So if that's what you're saying, I would agree. And the AND campaign is always taking, you read the book, we take positions on issues. Do you mean that you need to vote and that you need to choose a candidate to vote for? I would say that's correct. But if you mean choose a side by you choose a side and then you go along with whatever that side says, or you choose a side and then you no longer critique that side because the other side is so worse, I would say that's wrong. I would even go so far as to say that's unfaithful. Christians cannot just choose a side and go along with whatever that side says. So are you telling me that because the Democrats are so bad, I have to choose to be with the Republicans and with conservatives and ignore racial justice and ignore voter rights? Or are you telling me that I have to choose the progressives because the conservatives are so bad and I have to go along with their positions on abortion, have to go along with their positions on religious freedom? If that's what someone means by choosing a side, then I say that is completely wrong. And that's something that Christians shouldn't do. And you don't see, Jesus choosing a side in that way. Yes, he took certain stances when he was engaging with people, but he didn't say, well, since the Pharisees are so bad, I'm going to be a Sadducee. No, he changed he reframed the question, and he was something that transcended both of those while engaging both sides.
Yeah, I really appreciate that the distinction you make in your book on that issue. And you say in your book that we need to be not partisan, but we need to actually be driven by the gospel and gospel-centered, and that it takes an incredible amount of moral imagination to be able to move forward with a political vision centered on the gospel that is able to critique both sides. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by moral imagination, and how do we get it? And then also, what does it mean to be gospel-centered in our approach to politics?
Yeah, too often we settle for what's in front of us. Because people are right that sometimes you do have to take a stance and you do sometimes have to choose what party you're going to vote for in a certain election. That doesn't mean that you accept the vision of the world and the vision of politics that party is giving to you. Because if you do that, you're going to have a very distorted view, because those positions are set up in ways that can be very manipulative. So it's disappointing when you hear Christians say, just choose a side and just move with that. What moral imagination does is that it allows you to see past what they're giving you. Right? Moral imagination is the ability not just to see what has happened historically, not just to see what's happening in the present, but to see what could be and what should be, as I said. Right? And so if you have moral imagination, you can say, yeah, I'm a Republican, or yeah, I'm a Democrat, but I see that they fall so far short of what the gospel calls of me. I'm going to be more than that. And so I think it takes moral imagination to be more than just a generic Democrat or a generic Republican. The gospel and the imperatives that are on us because of the gospel cause us to something so much higher than that. And Christians should not just settle for what's in front of them. And when some influencers encourage people to do that, it's really disappointing because that's not what we're called to.
Yeah, that's really good. It seems what you're underlining to me is that many of us have a very limited understanding of what political involvement means, that it is mostly built around a vote that we cast every 2 to 4 years, perhaps. And you've pointed to there's a lot of local work that can be done. And so my question is, what would you say are the most meaningful political actions that we can take as Christians, as gospel-centered political actors that go beyond just casting a vote every 2 to 4 years?
Great question. Voting's important, but as I said, it's not the whole of your public witness. So, other things that you can do is get to know who some of your folks who work in the criminal justice system around your area are. There are a lot of people who talk about Black Lives Mattering, and that's absolutely right. They talk about social justice and criminal justice. But if you ask them who their prosecutor was, they wouldn't be able to tell you who their prosecutor was. When they go to vote for judges and things like that, they haven't looked it up. And so we have to make sure that we're more involved in those conversations, because even when we change policy, and there are some policies that needs to change, the people in those positions of judge and prosecutor are always going to have some level of discretion. And so you want to make sure that you understand their point of view, that they are people of character and compassion, so that they're making the right decisions. And so that's one of the things we can do. You can go to the school board, make sure that, that you're taking a look at what programs are in place for underserved children, how the money is kind of distributed throughout the school district. These are things that we can do in a nonpartisan way to have an impact, and a direct impact oftentimes on our neighbor.
Thank you. Yeah, one final question. As believers, we serve a crucified Lord, but also a risen Lord. And I wonder, you talk in your book about winning and losing. And my question is, how should we think about winning and losing in politics? Because as humans, we really like to win. And we often feel like our side winning is not just best for us, but also what's best for everyone, best for our neighbor too. But you also say in your book that we should choose to lose rather than win in a way that betrays the gospel. Can you say more about that?
Sure. So I'm a political strategist. I never plan to lose. And so wanting to win in politics makes sense. It's practical. You should want to win because there are certain things. I mean, a lot of these are life and death issues. So it's not just, I lose, I don't care. But how you win matters too. The posture and the path you took to win is important. And so when Christians use the dark arts, so to speak, to win, I don't think that win is worth having. When we support certain people who are bringing others down just to win or just to get the policies that we want, there's consequences to that. And so what the AND campaign always says is that our public witness is more important than winning. Now, hopefully we can have a strong public witness and we can win. That's the best case scenario. But when in conflict, when our public witness is in conflict with a win, we have to be prepared to lose, because what we represent, the messaging that we're putting out there, and who we are as Christians is more important than any temporal win. And that's a hard decision to make, but it's one that we have to if we're going to be faithful.
Well, I think our time is just about up, but I just want to thank you again for writing the book and for the work that you're doing and for inspiring us towards a more gospel-centered approach to political engagement. Thank you.
Thank you.